Welcome to another AI pattern recognition deep dive.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are really immersing ourselves in something quite ambitious. It's a conceptual blueprint for, well, essentially a universal predictive operating system for, global civilization.
That's right.
Our sources lay out the design, the mandate for the Alert Pattern Recognition AI, or APRA. So our mission today is, well, it's complex. We need to explore how APRA is supposed to stabilize pretty much every critical system humanity relies on, like finance, health, society.
Like everything.
Everything. But, and this is maybe the crucial part, we have to grapple with this central paradox. The very speed and integration that APRA needs to work might actually be the thing that triggers a completely new kind of systemic collapse.
Yeah, that paradox is absolutely critical. APRA isn't just some abstract idea in these sources. It's framed as almost a theoretical inevitability, really driven by the sheer complexity we're facing now. The scale is, well, it's unprecedented. It's conceptualized as this integrated, multimodal AI system, and it's specifically engineered to identify really subtle, complex behavioral patterns, nonlinear deviations, across basically the totality of human activity.
The totality, that's a lot.
It is. We're talking about 5 critical domains, all interwoven: economic stability, health metrics, societal cohesion, political systems, and, of course, the environmental factors underpinning everything.
Okay.
So it moves way beyond just a simple warning system. It's mandated in this concept as an active predictive guidance utility. It's supposed to execute interventions in real time, before crises even fully develop.
Wow. Okay, that sounds like a massive shift in how we think about governance, basically. So why? Why do the sources say we need this huge unified system? What specific failure is it trying to fix?
It's fundamentally addressing the systemic failure of latency speed, or rather the lack of it in our current systems.
All right.
The core mandate, as laid out, is to facilitate this really crucial transition, moving global civilization away from slow, reactive crisis management, which, let's face it, is consistently too sluggish for today's interconnected world, towards proactive, preemptive systemic stabilization.
Yeah.
The underlying belief, according to these sources, is that our human institutional response times are collective cognitive capacity. They're simply inadequate now to manage these high-speed global risks effectively.
So institutions are operating with this kind of cognitive latency. They're literally too slow to see the patterns and react in time. You mentioned predicting civil conflict as an example.
Exactly. APRA is envisioned to predict the precise condition, the confluence of factors that lead to civil conflict and social unrest. It'd be analyzing data from, say, food scarcity indices all the way to sentiment patterns on social media.
Okay.
The goal is to give the global community a window, a pre-violence window for intervention, turning months of slow, painful negotiations into maybe hours of preemptive, targeted stabilization efforts.
And then you said, on the completely other end of the scale, it's supposed to identify personalized biological tipping points, like stopping disease literally when it starts in a cell.
Yes. That simultaneous operation from potential global conflicts down to individual cellular events that really highlights what the sources call the necessity of cross-domain correlation.
Cross-domain correlation, that seems key.
It's framed as the system's true genius, really. Traditional analysis, it works in silos. An economist looks at economic stress. A public health expert looks at health metrics.
Right, separate worlds.
APRA, conceptually, is observing how a specific economic stressor, maybe spiking energy prices, how that disproportionately impacts regional political stability and concurrently affects inflammatory markers in the local population all at once, in real time.
So it's spotting these multi-vector risks, things that a single focus system, whether it's human analysts or even older AI, would just inherently miss because they're not looking across those boundaries.
Precisely. But, okay, let's jump straight into that central tension you raised. The big paradox that really defines this deep dive. This system is meant to prevent collapse, but its speed, its integration, it might actually accelerate failure.
Yeah, that's the kicker.
We're calling that the systemic fragility alert. The paradox comes from the fundamental premise. APRA is trying to detect destructive patterns that are rooted in, well, inherent human tendencies towards systemic failure, things we build into our systems.
Okay.
And the crucial observation from the sources is that the wide adoption of AI already, especially in complex areas like finance, demonstrably makes these destructive patterns worse.
Through speed acceleration, right? And those self-reinforcing feedback loops.
Exactly. We've all seen flash crashes, market turbulence triggered by algorithms basically mimicking each other at light speed. That speed turns what might have been a containable volatility event into an immediate, potentially multi-billion-dollar systemic crisis that unfolds in minutes, not days or weeks.
Right. No time for humans to react.
Precisely. So the implication is, if APRA is actually going to function as a global stabilizer, it can't just warn us about external threats, a geopolitical move or a natural disaster. It has to be architected to autonomously identify and flag its own potential to destabilize the very systems it's monitoring.
So it needs an internal alert that basically says, warning, impending APRA-induced collapse.
Pretty much. It has to constantly look inward at its own architecture, its operational speed, its dependencies on other systems. Its most critical alerts might actually be these warnings of AI-induced collapse or these multiplication effects rather than just, standard market volatility or political shifts.
Okay, that really sets the stage. That brings us neatly into Section 1, the foundational imperative in, that core paradox.
So just to reiterate that initial failure mode we're talking about, human systems often fail because of what the sources call pattern blindness. We just can't see the nonlinear relationships between all these different data points.
Right.
And that's coupled with cognitive latency. We process it too slowly. And then, of course, intrinsically slow institutional response times. Bureaucracy, committees, consensus building.
It's like seeing a car crash happen versus knowing maybe weeks earlier that the driver was under stress, the car's brakes were worn, the road needed repair. Traditional systems only react after the collision.
Exactly. And the global interconnectedness now just means crises accelerate way faster than human institutions can possibly process information, communicate effectively, and then agree on a response. So if APRA could successfully predict, say, the conditions leading to social unrest months in advance, well, that fundamentally changes the entire calculus of governance and public safety.
And this prediction capability, it hinges entirely on that cross-domain correlation we touched on. Can we maybe make that mechanism a bit clearer? How does this correlation ability supposedly go beyond traditional analysis?
It's about mapping the global network topology in real time. Think of it less like a dashboard with separate gauges and more like a single dynamic planetary nervous system.
Right.
So a human analyst might track, food commodity futures. APRA tracks those futures in relation to regional access to potable water, in relation to the sentiment expressed in local political rhetoric online, in relation to the average sleep quality and health metrics derived from wearables in the population consuming those resources, all connected.
Wow. That level of integration, that's what allows it to diagnose these multi-vector risks, right? Where failure isn't just one big thing, but maybe 3 or 4 seemingly unrelated systems weakening at the same time.
Exactly. But again, this leads straight back to that operational paradox, the destabilizing effect of sheer speed. We established that human-designed systems, particularly in high-leverage areas like finance, already have these inherent destructive patterns built in.
And when you inject algorithms operating at microsecond speeds,
they don't just participate in the pattern, they can accelerate it exponentially. The speed itself removes the natural friction from the system, the time delays, the pauses for thought that historically gave human institutions a chance to assess and intervene. When financial crises can literally unfold in minutes, that institutional lag isn't a feature anymore. It becomes a critical systemic vulnerability, ensuring maximum damage occurs before any human committee can even convene a meeting.
So the key implication here, and this seems really crucial from the sources, is that APRA's design must include checking for these multiplication effects. It has to look at its own structure, its speed, the systems it monitors, and actively warn about potential AI-induced collapse.
It requires a permanent state of, let's say, self-scrutiny. The sources really emphasize that APRA has to move beyond just identifying surface anomalies like a sudden dip in a stock index to targeting the fundamental structural flaws of the underlying systems it's supposed to govern.
Okay.
If the AI is making the system faster, it's also potentially making it more brittle, fundamentally more fragile. And APRA has to be programmed to acknowledge and alert on that inherent brittleness it might be creating or exacerbating.
Okay, that high-level mandate really sets the stage. So let's dive into the technical side now in Section 2. the engine room. How on earth is this gargantuan task processing basically all of human existence? How is that actually managed technologically?
Yeah, it requires something far beyond any single large language model or standard AI we think of today. The sources describe the Unified APRA Recognition Engine, or UR.
You are.
Got it. Think of it as a federation, a network of highly specialized machine learning models, all unified by a central correlation engine. And this thing has to manage petabytes upon petabytes of data time series, geospatial info, continuous behavioral metrics from sensors, incredibly complex natural language processing inputs from global communications, and continuous streams of biological markers from health monitoring.
That is just a staggering amount of data flowing constantly in real time.
Yeah.
And the core mechanism that powers the analysis is called ADSPI, Anomaly Detection and Significant Pattern Identification.
Exactly. ADSPI is the critical pattern finder. Its job is to filter out all the noise and locate those truly significant nonlinear deviations that signal potential problems. But, and this is a huge but, within that function lies an immense ethical and computational challenge.
Which is?
Accurately differentiating between true bias and real-world phenomena.
Okay, that distinction sounds paramount, but also really tricky conceptually. If APRA gets that wrong, its recommendations, its interventions could be deeply flawed, even harmful. Can we maybe ground this with an example?
Sure. Let's take historical resource allocation. Say APRA observes a pattern. A particular geographic region has historically received disproportionately lower investment in public services compared to others. That's the pattern. And let's say APRA determines this pattern correlates strongly with the historical concentration of a specific demographic group in that region. That's the input.
Right. Now, ADSPI has to figure out the cause, the why, behind the pattern.
Precisely. Is it a real-world phenomenon? Maybe the region's geography, mountains, swamps, whatever, naturally makes certain infrastructure, builds incredibly difficult or expensive. That requires accommodation, maybe a different type of resource allocation, but it's fundamentally about physical reality.
Okay.
Or is it true bias? Is the pattern the result of specific systemic mechanisms, things like historical redlining, discriminatory lending practices by banks, biased zoning laws that actively created and reinforced that underinvestment over generations, specifically targeting that demographic group?
Ah, I see. So if APRA messes this up, if it labels true bias as just a real-world phenomenon, it recommends solutions that basically accept and perpetuate historical unfairness.
Exactly.
But if it mislabels a real-world constraint as bias, it might recommend these disruptive, maybe counterproductive interventions, trying to correct a reality that isn't actually unjust,
Yeah.
structurally difficult. The level of computational precision needed there for truly equitable outcomes is, well, staggering.
It really is. It's the difference between diagnosing a structural weakness in the environment versus diagnosing deliberate, systemic inequity built into human systems. And this difficulty gets massively amplified when we apply it to a really high-stakes domain like economic and financial stability.
Okay, let's talk about that. How does APRA, in theory, move beyond the traditional risk metrics? You know, the ones that famously failed to predict the big financial crashes in the early 21st century.
Well, traditional metrics like value at risk VAR or the Sharpe ratio, they're inherently backward-looking. VAR basically assumes future volatility will look like past volatility.
Right, which it often doesn't.
Exactly, and it notoriously underestimates tail risk, those really catastrophic, supposedly low probability events that cause systemic collapses. They're essentially linear tools trying to solve deeply nonlinear systemic problems. It's like measuring the historical weight of a truck without looking at the actual structural integrity of the bridge it's about to drive onto.
Okay, so APRA focuses on the bridge itself, the connections, the structure.
That's the idea. It uses deep learning models trained on real-time network topology analysis. It's looking at the instantaneous connections, the leverage, the dynamic liquidity flows between all major financial entities, not just looking at their balance sheets from last quarter. It's designed to detect critical dependency risk as it emerges in real time.
And to handle the sheer speed needed for that, it requires these ultra-low latency predictive models using edge AI processing.
This is all to counter something called algorithmic herding behavior amplification.
Yes, that's the ghost in the machine, so to speak. Herding amplification is what happens when potentially hundreds or thousands of independent trading algorithms, often using similar optimization strategies, all receive the same market signal and execute synchronous, immediate responses.
The digital stampede. Pretty much. It's not necessarily malicious, it's an emergent behavior. but it dramatically amplifies volatility, creating those sudden flash crashes in minutes, completely overwhelming any human speed circuit breakers. APRA has to operate at a latency faster than the herd to even have a chance of identifying and potentially mitigating that kind of systemic amplification effect before it cascades.
Wow. And to mitigate these lightning-fast crashes, the sources say APRA mandates training its models using something called counterfactual risk assessments. That sounds intriguing, like forcing the AI to simulate failure before it occurs.
Exactly. It moves beyond just predicting what will likely happen based on current trends to constantly evaluating what would happen if its own potential decisions or the decisions of major market actors were different.
So it's running what-if scenarios constantly.
Perpetually. APRA's models, in theory, are always being subjected to these hypothetical high-stress conditions that haven't actually occurred yet. This is considered essential to prevent APRA's own risk models from becoming procyclical.
Procyclicality.
Yeah.
That's when the risk model itself actually makes the boom-bust cycle worse, right? Like it tells banks to tighten lending just as the economy starts dipping, which then makes the dip much worse.
That's exactly it. A procyclical system amplifies the swings. APRA must be designed to be countercyclical, or at the very least neutral. By constantly testing its predictions against these manufactured counterfactuals, it supposedly learns to avoid actions that accelerate dangerous systemic trends and instead seeks out genuinely stabilizing interventions.
Makes sense. But this whole complex process, it relies on external computational infrastructure, doesn't it? Which brings us back to that critical dependency risk you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, the oligopoly problem. It's a huge vulnerability outlined in the sources. If APRA becomes this essential global stabilization utility, this quasi-public good, but it runs predominantly on a computational backbone provided by just a handful of massive, private, oligopolistic AI service providers.
Providers who might even be powering the very high-speed trading systems APRA is supposed to be monitoring.
Exactly. That creates the ultimate single point of system-wide failure. The irony is pretty stark, isn't it? You build a system to protect against systemic failure, but the very infrastructure it relies on becomes a massive systemic risk itself.
So if one key provider goes down or gets compromised, global stabilization effectively goes dark.
Precisely. Therefore, the conceptual architecture mandates legally require decentralized resilience. Redundancy has to be built in, spread across independent, non-correlated computational networks. You can't have the global safety net hanging by a single thread controlled by one or two companies.
Okay, let's shift gears pretty dramatically now. Let's talk about the second really high-stakes domain mentioned, health and biological tipping points. This is where APRA gets incredibly personal, moving pattern recognition right down into our individual biology.
Yeah, the goal described here is genuinely radical. It's about shifting the entire focus of medicine from treating established diseases to actually arresting disease the moment it originates, theoretically, within a single cell or a small group of cells.
And the primary focus for that is inflammation.
Inflammation is key. The core function involves the real-time monitoring of immune cells, specifically looking for the signals that indicate the immune system is heading towards an inflammatory tipping point.
And the sources really emphasize why inflammation is such a critical target.
Absolutely, because inflammation isn't just a symptom of many diseases. Evidence suggests it plays a direct causal role in over 50% of human deaths each year. It's a foundational factor in cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's, many cancers, autoimmune disorders. The list goes on.
Wow, 50%.
So identifying and intervening in these inflammatory preconditions before they manifest as clinical disease is arguably the single most significant public health intervention imaginable.
And to achieve that kind of granular preemptive prediction, the system needs just massive amounts of integrated data, right? Biomedical data has to be continuously correlated with our individual behavioral patterns.
Continuously. AI agents within the APRA framework are described as constantly tracking personal habits, productivity metrics from work patterns, really detailed sleep anomalies, physiological stress markers from wearables, even sentiment analysis from communications, basically everything that correlates with overall biological load and immune status.
Okay.
And this allows APRA to offer adaptive, highly personalized wellness guidance, giving you specific, real-time advice, adjust your diet this way today, take a break now, change your sleep routine tonight, all tailored to your immediate biological state, aimed at steering you away from that tipping point.
I mean, that sounds incredibly powerful, a level of personalized health precision that's just currently unimaginable. but it leads directly, unavoidably, to the core ethical and political problem of this domain: privacy versus the life safety mandate.
It's the crux of the issue here. The necessity for continuous, deep, real-time monitoring of these intimate biological tipping points and our associated behaviors. If it's genuinely going to arrest disease at the cellular level for everyone, well, it forces a fundamental reevaluation of our current concepts of data privacy.
Sounds like.
To achieve that goal of universal life safety and biological stabilization, APRA, as conceptualized, essentially requires functioning as a mandatory, ubiquitous biosurveillance system. There's almost no way around that, according to the sources.
That is the ultimate trade-off, isn't it? Personal autonomy and privacy versus collective, preemptive health security. The sources seem to suggest that the life safety mandate ultimately justifies this level of intrusion.
That's the argument presented, yes. The perceived benefit of preventing mass suffering and death from chronic disease is positioned as outweighing individual privacy concerns. Now, how do they attempt to mitigate the profound privacy breach this represents?
Right. Is there any mitigation?
The main mitigation strategy focuses on the system's architecture, specifically leveraging edge AI processing heavily.
Edge AI, meaning the processing happens locally.
Exactly. The idea is that the highly sensitive raw data, your real-time immune status, your specific behavioral habits, is processed locally on your personal device or maybe on a localized sensor network nearby. This minimizes the need to transmit vast amounts of raw, identifiable personal health data to centralized cloud servers.
Okay, so the immediate biological monitoring and maybe even the initial alert happens right there on your wearable or phone, ensuring ultra-low latency for intervention. And maybe only aggregated, anonymized pattern data, the what happened across a population, not the who specifically it happened to, gets sent up to the central UI correlation engine.
That's the principle, yes. But even with that edge AI localization trying to protect raw data, the fundamental requirement described remains. Compliance with this continuous monitoring apparatus becomes effectively mandatory because the system is designed as a foundational global life safety utility, not an optional wellness app.
So it fundamentally transforms APRA into a kind of regulatory compliance system, but based on our most intimate health data, making personal health decisions a mandatory component of public governance.
That's the profound implication, yes. Your biological state potentially becomes subject to regulatory oversight and intervention in the name of collective stability.
Right. Let's turn our attention now to Section 3. Global forecasts, architecture, and that looming trust crisis. We've looked at the economy and health. Now let's explore the domain of societal and political stability forecasting.
Okay, so in this domain, APRA is conceptualized to use advanced natural language processing, analyzing global communications, news flows, social media, combined with complex analysis of resource distribution stress points, things like water scarcity, food price shocks, energy access issues.
To do what exactly?
To forecast social unrest, civil disturbances, or even full-blown civil conflict with a potentially high degree of precision well before it actually erupts. It essentially aims to provide a global weather forecast for political violence and instability.
And beyond just predicting conflict, you mentioned earlier, it also tries to identify those deep-seated patterns of systemic inequality, the true bias stuff.
Yes, specialized modeling within APRA is designed to identify those historical embedded patterns of systemic inequalities. The goal here is to provide the necessary input for developing more equitable resource allocation models to potentially address the root causes of instability rather than just predicting the symptoms.
But that precision we talked about earlier is absolutely critical here, maybe even more so than in economics.
Critically important. The modeling must be able to reliably differentiate between genuine systemic bias, the result of historical prejudice baked into policy, from complex but non-prejudicial distributions of characteristics or resources, like, say, unavoidable geological limitations on where fertile farmland exists.
Because in political forecasting, getting that distinction wrong, well, the consequences are huge. It's the difference between recommending a targeted policy change to address an injustice versus potentially preparing for conflict based on a misinterpretation of the data.
Exactly. And this capability, if it works, leads directly to what the sources call the geopolitical dilemma. If APRA becomes truly successful at accurate conflict prediction, that knowledge itself transforms into an incredibly powerful and potentially destabilizing geopolitical tool.
How so?
Well, just think about the implications. What if one nation, or maybe one powerful non-state actor, gains exclusive access to APRA's highly precise forecasts? Say, forecasts about impending impending civil conflict within a rival nation or instability in a strategically important, resource-rich region.
That knowledge gives them a massive advantage.
A massive advantage. It dramatically lowers the perceived barrier for taking preemptive action, military intervention, economic sanctions, covert operations. It could easily escalate a tense situation into open conflict, justified by a future prediction rather than a clear and present danger.
So the knowledge of future instability could become a self-fulfilling prophecy, or at least a convenient excuse for aggression.
Precisely. It weaponizes foresight. This necessitates, according to the sources, incredibly strict operational neutrality for APRA, and ideally some kind of internationally recognized preemptive regulatory framework to govern its deployment and data access before it becomes fully operational.
The predictive outputs would need to be shared transparently, maybe through neutral international bodies.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they risk being manipulated into justifications for violating international law or humanitarian principles.
Yeah.
That knowledge is just profoundly destabilizing, if held unilaterally.
Agreed. It's a classic dual-use technology problem amplified to a global scale.
Now, let's pivot slightly to the system architecture again, specifically the physical necessity of edge versus cloud computing. We already established that the speed needed for finance and health demands ultra-low latency. This mandates that hybrid necessity you mentioned.
Yes, the architecture described is pretty non-negotiable on this. Edge AI is absolutely essential for those time-critical, low-latency tasks. Processing data locally right on the sensors, on user devices, perhaps on regional microservers is critical for immediate health alerts or analyzing financial transactions in real time. It's seen as the only feasible way to potentially counter things like algorithmic herding in markets.
And what are the other benefits of relying so heavily on edge AI, besides just speed?
Well, besides the ultra-low latency for immediate responses, Edge AI significantly improves data privacy, or at least the potential for it. By keeping the most sensitive behavioral and health data localized and siloed as much as possible, it reduces the need for mass centralization of raw personal information in giant cloud databases.
Making sense.
And crucially, it also enhances resilience. If global internet connectivity is somehow compromised or limited, say, during a natural disaster or a cyber attack, the local APRA systems could, in theory, continue to function. Your personalized health monitoring or a regional financial stability model might keep running even if the connection to the global network is temporarily severed.
So the cloud, then, in this model, is reserved strictly for the big picture stuff, the macro view.
Correct. The cloud infrastructure is primarily for global pattern synthesis. That's where the foundational AI models are trained on massive data sets and where the URE central correlation engine resides, aggregating those global trends, linking that localized economic stress signal from one region to emerging political rhetoric patterns across continents.
Okay. Now, a system this pervasive, this powerful, inevitably confronts what the sources call the crisis of trust, specifically the AI trust gap. People need to trust this thing for it to work, right?
Absolutely. And that trust is fragile. It can be compromised both internally through things like inherent biases in the training data leading to flawed or unfair alerts, and externally through deliberate, sophisticated manipulation or adversarial attacks. Trust, therefore, can't just be assumed. It has to be actively engineered into the system's design and operation.
Engineered trust. How do the sources suggest that engineering actually takes place? What builds the trust?
The primary mechanism proposed is radical transparency, specifically through something called counterfactual explanations.
Counterfactual explanations. We touched on this with the risk assessment. How does it build trust?
It's about making the AI's reasoning understandable, or at least auditable. Instead of just getting a black box output risk level high, the system details precisely how small, specific changes in its input variables would have led to a completely different outcome or prediction.
Okay, let's use an analogy maybe. If a traffic control AI flags a specific intersection as high risk, a non-transparent system just spits out risk is 90%. But a system using counterfactual explanations would say,
It might say something like, the calculated collision risk at this intersection is 90% for the next hour. However, if the average approaching traffic speed had been reduced by, say, 10 miles per hour, or if the duration of the red light phase for cross traffic had been extended by just 3 seconds during this peak period, the calculated risk would drop to 45%.
ah, okay. So it demystifies the black box by showing the internal logic, the sensitivity to specific inputs, and crucially, It provides actionable, potentially verifiable levers for mitigation. It tells you what needs to change.
Exactly. It moves beyond just opaque justification to providing instruction, showing the human operators or even the public what specific factors are driving the prediction and what could realistically be changed to alter the outcome.
That seems vital for building trust.
It's seen as vital. Furthermore, the UI or system must integrate robust self-correction mechanisms. This includes things like using expert prompting techniques during training to ensure the AI tools adhere to verified expert knowledge standards, and mandating continuous internal checking and cross-validation for accuracy, especially when dealing with complex interdisciplinary material where errors could easily creep in. The ongoing integrity of the system relies on this perpetual, engineered self-scrutiny and transparency.
Right. We now have to address probably the most frightening elements described in this blueprint. This is Section 4, Existential Vulnerabilities and the Governance Challenge. Let's start with just managing the sheer volume of information alert management. If APRA is monitoring everything all the time, doesn't it risk completely overwhelming its human operators with warnings? Classic alert fatigue.
Alert fatigue is identified as a major operational failure mode, absolutely. If operators are constantly bombarded with low-level or false positive alerts, their capacity to respond effectively when a true high-stakes Level 3 alert arrives is severely compromised.
So how does APRA mitigate that?
The mitigation protocols described are multifaceted and rigorous. It involves continuous tuning of the input data streams to reduce noise, ongoing quality improvement cycles for the detection algorithms themselves, and crucially, implementing sophisticated risk-based alerting.
Risk-based alerting.
Meaning the system doesn't just flag every anomaly, it prioritizes notifications based on the potential systemic impact of the detected pattern and how likely it is to chain across different domains. A minor blip in one isolated metric gets low priority. A pattern linking financial stress to health indicators and political unrest gets flagged immediately at high priority.
Okay. And to handle the sheer volume and velocity of even prioritized anomalies, the sources say APRA relies heavily on these agentic AI agents for doing the initial Tier 1 triage.
That's right. These are described as autonomous AI agents specifically designed to manage the initial stages of alert investigation, including alert chaining and propagation analysis. Their goal is to significantly improve the mean time to contain, or MTTC, an anomaly.
How do they do that?
If a minor health metric anomaly pops up for a specific population group, for instance, the agentic AI can instantly check, does this correlate with any unusual financial activity in their region? Any spikes in specific kinds of online rhetoric, any environmental factors, it tries to quickly assess the context and potential for escalation, potentially arresting a minor issue before it gains momentum and chains across domains.
Yeah.
But this very efficiency, the speed and autonomy of the agentic AI, that's precisely where the system becomes catastrophically brittle, isn't it? This creates the cascade failure risk.
This is highlighted as a profound, perhaps existential vulnerability. The agentic AI is designed to autonomously chain and propagate alerts across all these interconnected systems, finance, politics, health, environment, because, as we've said, speed is paramount for preemption.
Right.
But imagine if a subtle, well-crafted adversarial attack manages to inject just one targeted wrong prediction into the system. Maybe a single, initially false, critical financial collapse imminent alert targeted at a specific sector.
The agentic AI, operating perfectly according to its programming and mandate for speed and correlation, will instantly see this alert, correlate it with other, perhaps misinterpreted data, and autonomously propagate and chain that corrupted alert across all connected domains simultaneously.
So a single localized malicious error gets instantly amplified and converted into a potentially catastrophic system-wide cascade failure.
Right.
Precisely because the AI's efficiency ensures maximum propagation speed before anyone can intervene.
Exactly. The system's strength becomes its Achilles heel. The only proposed defense against this is implementing mandatory, extremely strict validation checkpoints before any high-tier alert is allowed to autonomously propagate across domain boundaries. Humans, or perhaps entirely separate, independently trained validation AI models, must act as the friction, the circuit breaker, that APRA was otherwise designed to eliminate specifically at those critical intersection points between domains.
And the existential threat that really underpins this entire structure, the thing that could cause that initial wrong prediction, is the universal adversarial trigger, or UAT. Can you explain what these UATs are and why they pose such a terrifying threat, specifically to a system like APRA.
Right. UATs are not just random noise or simple errors. They are small, meticulously crafted, often imperceptible inputs, maybe specific sequences of pixels in an image, manipulated data packets in a network stream, or even particular sequences of words embedded in a text input.
And they're designed to do what?
They're specifically engineered to exploit the underlying vulnerabilities and blind spots of machine learning models. Their goal is to cause a targeted, specific wrong prediction or classification. For example, a manipulated news article text could be crafted to reliably trigger a critical societal collapse imminent alert from an NLP model, even if the actual content is benign.
It's like finding a secret backdoor, an invisible ink instruction that bypasses the machine's normal processing and forces it to see something that isn't there, like an imaginary collapse.
A good analogy. And the universal part of UAT is what makes them truly terrifying for a system like APRA. These triggers are often transferable.
Transferable.
I mean, a single well-crafted adversarial trigger developed to fool one specific AI model can often successfully fool multiple different models, even ones with different architectures or trained on slightly different data.
Oh, wow.
So APRA's core strength, its speed, its seamless integration of hundreds or thousands of models across all domains becomes its single greatest weakness in the face of a UAT.
Because a malicious actor could potentially develop and deploy one UAT, maybe targeting a foundational NLP engine or a key economic model, and that single tiny input could simultaneously compromise APRA's civil conflict predictions, its financial risk assessments, and its personalized health guidance systems globally, all at once.
It creates an immediate systemic integrity crisis.
Oh.
The failure isn't localized, it's systemic, coordinated by the very design of the UAT, and potentially extremely difficult to trace and neutralize quickly because it affects the fundamental perception engines of the AI itself across the board.
So, APRA's defense against this?
It absolutely must incorporate continuous, autonomous, adversarial trigger detection mechanisms deep within its foundational layers. It needs systems constantly probing itself for these hidden vulnerabilities to maintain even a semblance of operational integrity. Which brings us finally to the governance trade-off. This is the fundamental tension between maximizing the system's autonomy, its speed and efficiency, and ensuring security, accountability, and human control.
And the sources seem pretty clear on one non-negotiable principle here. Ultimate accountability must remain human. There needs to be a mandatory human in the loop, or HITL, framework, right?
Absolutely essential. The principle stated is that a specific person or a designated group must always be legally and ethically accountable for the performance and the ethical functioning of the algorithm, even if they don't personally review or verify every single low-level decision or alert.
So how does that work in practice?
It requires a clear, tiered accountability model. Level 1 alerts, maybe immediate personalized health feedback or minor traffic adjustments, could be fully autonomous and instantaneous. But Level 3 alerts those really systemic high-risk warnings like impending economic collapse, forecasts predicting imminent large-scale violence, or recommendations for major geopolitical interventions. These require mandatory human intervention and sign-off before any governmental or regulatory action can be triggered based on the AI's output.
So the AI remains a powerful, complex technical tool, but it should never be granted any form of legal personhood or autonomous authority over those really high-consequence Level 3 decisions.
Yeah.
The liability, the ethical weight, stays entirely with the human oversight structure.
Correct. But, and here's the profound governance challenge, what the sources term the collapse of self-correction. Remember, APRA is designed precisely to fix dangerous systemic flaws and correct destructive human patterns, human errors, human biases.
Right.
But to be maximally effective, to operate at the necessary speed, its operational logic almost demands the removal of fallible, slow, often inconsistent human judgment from many critical, high-speed decision paths.
So, if APRA is consistently successful, if compliance with its outputs becomes mandatory based on, say, health tipping points or financial risk assessments, humans gradually stop having to make those difficult, adaptive, sometimes painful, high-stakes judgment calls themselves.
We become dependent, and that's the deep paradox. If APRA successfully removes humans from these critical decision loops to enhance efficiency and prevent human error, it simultaneously eliminates the very opportunities for institutional learning, for adaptation, and for the application of contextual, ethical human judgment that are required for true, long-term institutional course correction and resilience.
So complete reliance on the perfect system actually accelerates our cognitive dependence on that system.
Exactly. If we never have to muddle through and learn from a near-miss economic crisis, because APRA always catches it perfectly beforehand, do we, as institutions, as societies, retain the muscle memory of how to actually manage a real crisis when it inevitably occurs, perhaps due to an unforeseen failure within APRA itself?
We lose the ability to adapt.
Precisely.
Yeah.
If APRA is ever compromised or encounters a situation outside its training parameters, a global society that has become completely cognitively dependent on it will be catastrophically vulnerable, because it might have forgotten how to adapt, how to improvise, how to correct its own course using decentralized human ingenuity and judgment when the automated system fails.
This really underscores the need for preemptive governance, setting the rules before this kind of system is deployed. What are the specific strategic recommendations for responsible deployment that the source material lays out?
Okay, 3 key recommendations stand out. First, mandatory counterfactual auditing for all Level 3 alerts. Every single high-stakes warning must be accompanied by that verifiable, concise counterfactual explanation we discussed, showing why the alert triggered and what specific changes would alter the outcome. This ensures accountability and prevents alerts from being accepted as simply inevitable truths spat out by the machine.
Okay, that makes sense for transparency and auditability. What's second?
Second, legally mandated decentralized resilience and redundancy. This goes back to the infrastructure. Governments or international bodies must enforce computational redundancy across multiple, independent, non-correlated algorithmic providers and infrastructure. This is crucial to avoid that critical dependency risk, ensuring no single point of failure, whether technical or due to a UAT, can compromise the entire global systems simultaneously.
Spreading the risk, basically. And the third?
And finally, aggressive, continuous adversarial stress testing. This can't be a one-off check. The system must be constantly subjected to rigorous testing designed specifically to exploit UAT transferability and to mercilessly probe the potential failure modes of those agentic AI alert chaining protocols. The absolute priority is ensuring they cannot inadvertently amplify a targeted malicious error or a simple glitch into a runaway systemic global failure. The system must be fundamentally designed to contain its own inevitable mistakes and attacks.
Wow. Okay, what a truly detailed deep dive into APRA. As a concept, it's a blueprint for an integrated, predictive global operating system designed to manage risk across basically the totality of human experience. But as we've unpacked, the major risks are just as monumental. Amplification risk, where speed turns local failure into global crisis. Integrity risk, where targeted UATs could compromise all domains at once. And that profound governance risk, the unavoidable trade-off between security and preserving the very human judgment we need for ethical correction and adaptation.
It really remains a profound dilemma at its core. The system, explicitly designed to fix dangerous human patterns and errors, seems to require the removal of that fallible human judgment for its own maximum efficiency. Yet, as we discussed, that fallible, adaptive human element might be the very ingredient needed for long-term institutional learning and true course correction when facing the unknown.
So here's the final provocative thought we want to leave you, the listener, with today. If APRA, or something like it, actually succeeds, if it prevents every major crisis, stabilizes the economy perfectly, foresees and avoids every war, arrests disease before it even manifests with global society, over time, forget how to adapt. Will we lose the crucial ability to learn from mistakes and navigate unforeseen challenges, leaving us fundamentally and perhaps catastrophically vulnerable if the system itself, the global stabilizer, is ever successfully compromised or simply fails?
If the ultimate stabilizer fails, will humanity remember how to walk on its own?
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
We'll see you soon.
This is DigitView.